Many years ago, far from towns and cities, lived a big house in the place called Giant's Hollow. Most people never went near it. They believed something evil lived there. And they were right. It was as big as a castle. Inside that house lived two giant brothers, Drog and Dran. They were identical twins, meaning they looked exactly the same. Both had deep voices that could shake the trees. They were not kind. They were not gentle. They were pure evil. Drog and Dran had lived there their whole lives. They lived with their mother, Old Mana, a giant woman who had once been kind but now stayed quiet most of the time. Some said she was scared of her own sons. For many years, the twin giants were nothing but trouble to the villagers nearby. People often went missing, young men, hunters, and even farmers who went too far into the woods. Animals disappeared too. Horses, goats, dogs. No one ever found their bodies. Sometimes, villagers heard loud footsteps in the night. Trees would fall. Fences were broken. But no one was brave enough to go to Giant's Hollow to ask questions. Everyone just stayed away, hoping the giants would forget about them. But evil never forgets. One day, the sky over Giant's Hollow was dark and heavy. Rain fell like never before. The cold wind howled through the land. Inside the giant house, Old Mana lay in bed, breathing slowly. Her eyes were weak. Her skin was pale. She was very sick. Dran sat beside her, holding her large hand. Drog stood in the doorway, not sure what to do. Mama Dran said in a quiet voice, "You need help." Old Mana's lips moved slowly. "Call the doctor from the village." The brothers didn't like people from the village. But this was their mother. She was the only person they cared about. So Drog left the house, walking miles through the fog to find a doctor. In a small village not far from the edge of Giant's Hollow lived a man named Dr. Harlan. He was kind and smart. He had helped many people in the village. When Drog, the giant, knocked on his door, the ground shook. Dr. Harlan opened the door and saw the giant standing there, wet from the rain. "My mother is sick," Drog said. "Come now." Dr. Harlan grabbed his medical bag and followed. He walked fast, even though his heart was pounding. Everyone knew the stories about the twins. But he couldn't say no to someone asking for help. He walked through the muddy fields, past the dead trees, and across the foggy plains. But by the time he reached the giant house, it was too late. Inside the house, Dran sat beside Old Mana's bed, crying. Her eyes were closed. She was not breathing anymore. Her large hand had gone cold. When Drog and the doctor walked in, Dran stood up, his eyes full of pain and anger. "She is dead," he shouted. Dr. Harlan stepped forward. "I am sorry. I came as fast as I could." "You were too slow," Drog yelled. "If you had come earlier, she would be alive." "I swear," Dr. Harlan said, "I tried. I really did." But the twins didn't want to hear it. Grief had turned to rage. Their mother was gone, and they wanted someone to blame. And that someone was the doctor. The twins began shouting and throwing things. Dr. Harlan knew he had to get out. He turned and ran out the back door of the giant house. Rain poured down harder. He didn't know where he was going, but he just wanted to get away. As he ran behind the house, his feet slipped in the mud. He fell and landed in something hard. He looked around. He was in a field behind the house, near a big, deep hole in the ground. And all around him were skulls, human skulls. Bones, Some still wore clothes, the clothes of people who had gone missing from the village years ago. Dr. Harlan's heart nearly stopped. "They have been killing people," he whispered. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. He turned. Dran was standing there. Before he could run, a giant hand grabbed him and lifted him into the air like a toy. "Found him," Dran said with a wicked smile. They threw Dr. Harlan into a dark stone room behind the house. It looked like an old garage, but not like the kind you keep cars in. This one had chains, ropes, and tools. "Yes," Dran said. "Help carry our mother's body. We want to bury her." Dr. Harlan saw his chance. "All right," he said. "Let me help." They untied him, but they did not let him go far. They led him into the big room where old Mana still lay. Together, the giants lifted her body. The doctor pretended to help, but he was thinking of a way to escape. And then he saw it. The back door was open, just a little. With all his strength, Dr. Harlan ran. He darted under the giant's arms and sprinted out the door. The giants roared and gave chase, but the doctor was small and fast. He ran through the trees, through the fog, through the cold wind and rain. Behind him, the ground shook with every giant step. But he didn't stop. He ran until he reached the village. When Dr. Harlan reached the village, he shouted for help. The villagers were shocked. Some wept. Some got angry. Others were afraid. But they believed him. The next morning, the police came. Not just a few, but many. Some from the city. They had trucks and weapons. They followed the doctor back to Giant's Hollow. The giants were still there, digging a grave for their mother. They didn't see the police coming until it was too late. The police shouted through loudspeakers. They told the giants to stop and raise their hands. But the twins roared in anger. They threw rocks and broken wood. The police fought back with smoke and nets, ropes, and strong lights. After a long battle, the twins were finally caught. It took over 20 men and 4 trucks to hold them down. They were taken away in chains. The whole village watched as the evil twins were dragged through the town. For the first time in many years, the village slept in peace. No more footsteps in the night. No more missing people. No more fear. The land around Giant's Hollow was left empty. No one wanted to live there. The house was burned down. The bones were buried properly in the village cemetery. Dr. Harlan was thanked for his bravery. But he never smiled about it. He had seen too much. He had looked into the eyes of true evil. A month later, while cleaning out old records from the house, a worker found something strange. In one of the old rooms, there were 3 beds. Not 2, 3. One bed had never been used, but it was the same size as the others. Did that mean there was another giant? A third brother? No one knows for sure.